And I've also found interesting problems with Zoom or with any of these formats that are that I've talked with Ruth a little bit about. But with this same young man, he gets more self-conscious. He's worried that I'm going to have some judgment about his coping mechanism, which is, and it's getting harder and harder for him to be isolated. And it felt to me when I was talking with him last time that I was peering at him, that this wasn't, this was an invasion of him, that I was looking at him in a way that I wouldn't be focused on him in a regular therapeutic contact. There was no room to get away from me except to leave the screen altogether. And it felt like it was a very poignant realization on my part that the nature of this medium, which is what we're left with, has got some problems in it too. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I've also found that for a lot of the traumatized individuals I work with who have a lot of shame and self-loathing difficulties, that seeing themselves on the screen is intensely disturbing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've talked about how they can sort of ignore seeing themselves in the corner, and some simply can't do it. And they said, we've got to go to the telephone. And so we've gone back to the telephone, and now we're slowly working toward a more virtual medium, and hopefully they can adapt to, starting to look at themselves on the screen and having more self-compassion and having less shame and self-loathing associated with seeing themselves.
I think if you don't work with trauma or you haven't been traumatized yourself, it's very hard to recognize how difficult it is for people with these histories to look at themselves.
Absolutely.
Physically painful to look at themselves. They tend to avoid mirrors. Eye contact can be hours of therapy. Just making it possible for someone to make eye contact. So, this is a challenging time for trauma survivors. 2 slides of yours that I use in almost every presentation are the before and after of the connectivity between the periaqueductal gray and the amygdala. Mm-hmm. And people need to understand that.
So I think really outlining the importance of the reptilian brain and innate reflexive functioning in trauma, and how neurofeedback can actually have an impact on such low-level brain structures such as the periaqueductal gray in the reptilian brain will be critical. And then also talking about the sense of self, both at rest and under threat, and how the reptilian brain can really have a significant effect on the default mode network and the sense of self, I think will be critical discussions.
Yeah. So that people really understand that developmental trauma is a problem first in the brain before it ever becomes symptoms of a disorder. It is a problem in the development of the brain.
I think developmental trauma alters the developmental trajectory.
Yeah. And I was going to say even that it could be a developmental setback.
Mm-hmm. And I think through treatment, you can catch up later, right? And I think that's often what we do in treatment, right? We bring those areas back online that didn't come online during development, right? And so we catch up during adulthood.
Right. And the problem has been that that's very hard to do in a therapeutic conversation alone, with a therapeutic conversation alone. I think both you and I agree that for the treatment of developmental trauma and its shattering impacts on the brain and the psyche, that you need to do both, and best done by the same person, if at all possible. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, we can have a conversation, right?
Yeah.